Well, let's go back to the spin room now. We're joined by James Cleverly, the Conservative Party chairman. James, the very opening statement tonight from the Prime Minister was a lie, wasn't it? Told us that the election had been called because Parliament was blocking him, when of course we all know that Parliament did pass his Brexit deal and he wanted to call the election.
The House of Commons voted initially for the Prime Minister's negotiated deal. This is a deal that everyone claimed he was not even trying to negotiate, and yet he successfully negotiated. He said he would strip out the backstop. He stripped out the backstop. The House of Commons initially voted for it and then immediately voted against it. The Parliament, as it was made up before the general election, had been saying no, 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 no. We needed to get into the habit of saying yes. That is why the Prime Minister was forced into calling this general election, because you have to have a working majority if you want to govern.
He told us tonight, in very simple terms, that deal was oven ready. Now, he was asked directly by a voter tonight why anyone would trust him. The nation will have looked at this debate, and you both, in utter despair. At the heart of all this, a simple question: how can we trust you? He lied about the reason for the election. He lied when he responded about the talk to that own question. He talked of building 40 new hospitals when we know that they're only investing in 6 new hospitals. Why would he do that on a question about his own integrity?
You keep using the word lie. Let me remind you, when he was Mayor of London, he promised to bring violent crime down, and he did. He promised to get investment in the transport network, and he did. He promised to build more homes, and he did. No, but you keep using the word lie. It's a very strong word. I'm going to pull you up on it. The lie that we saw this evening was the one that came from the Labour Party, claiming the NHS was for sale. Lie, a complete lie. It is not and never will be for sale.
Let me ask Labour about their language. No, I just want to ask about the question, James. I'm so sorry, because he talked about 40 hospitals and it's not. It's 6 new hospitals.
They are desperate to distract. The reason they keep saying that the NHS is for sale when they know it is a lie is because they are trying to divert attention away from the complete vacuum where their Brexit policy should be. Jeremy Corbyn failed 9 times to answer the key question facing British politics at the moment, which is how are you going to deliver Brexit?
There's no answer to the hospitals question then. While he was answering questions on integrity, your own Conservative press office, just let me finish my question, was pretending to be a fact-check service. Let's just have a look at the Twitter feed for that debate that you put out. This is the Conservative press office pretending to be a fact-check service, and you've renamed yourself with a credibility tick, Fact Check UK. You were misleading the public. You were trying to coat your propaganda as hardened fact.
The Twitter handle of the CCHQ press office remained CCHQ Press, so it's clear the nature of the site. And the reason we did that is because we were calling out the inaccuracies, the lies that were coming out during the debate. The NHS is not for sale. It has never been for sale. It will never be for sale.
You were misleading the public.
I disagree.
Why would you have to change it to something that said fact check if people believed you when you just put CCHQ?
Because Jeremy Corbyn spent that whole debate spouting things he knew was not true. The Prime Minister has set out a deal, negotiated with the EU, that will get us out by the 31st of January.
I just want to go back to this issue, because you seem to be diverting me away from it. Whose idea was that fact check? Please tell us.
The reason that Jeremy Corbyn... You're asking me questions and not giving me the chance to answer.
I'm giving you the chance to answer this one. Whose idea was that fact check?
NHS. It would have been our digital.
Did you know about it?
The point is, the reason the NHS
You're the chairman. Did you know about it?
To have a row about the NHS is because it hides the fact they have a vacuum where their Brexit policy, and we were calling that out, and that is completely legitimate to highlight the inaccuracies that they're intentionally pumping into the public domain.
So you knew about this? It's completely legitimate, and you backed it. Did you okay it? Did you know about this?
The digital team have got a remit. I set that remit. They work within the remit.
So it was your idea?
I'm absolutely comfortable with them calling out when the Labour Party put what they know to be complete fabrications in the public domain, and we will call that out every time they do it.
You dressed up party lines as a fact-check service. That is dystopian.
We were calling out the Labour Party's willful misinformation about the NHS. And every time they do that, we will call it out. And the reason they're doing it is because they are trying to make sure we have this row rather than the row about where their Brexit policy should be. This is what they want us to be doing, because it means that we're not talking about the vacuum where their Brexit policy is. Nine times Jeremy Corbyn failed to show any leadership on Brexit. Compare that with the Prime Minister's position, Boris's position.
So that voter
negotiated a deal, which everyone said he wasn't going to be able to, put it to the House. We can get it through by the end of January, and then we can move on to the priorities of the British people. That's what they want us to do. So that
voter was absolutely right when he said at the heart of it is a question of character and integrity. As CCHQ, you do not believe that people will believe the facts or the clarifications that you put out. You know that people do not trust you as Conservative headquarters, so you have to put something out and call it a fact check instead.
We were checking the facts. And the fact is, the NHS will never be for sale. And the Labour Party keeps saying otherwise because they are trying to divert the conversation away from the vacuum where their Brexit policy is. That is absolutely a legitimate function during an election, calling out. People talk about honesty and integrity. The Labour Party know, and they do it at every election. You look back, was it 24 hours to save the NHS, the NHS? They do that every single time, and we call them out, and we will continue to do so.
Thank you very much, and I apologise for the problems that an interview has down the line sometimes. Thanks for bearing with us. Labour Shadow Business Secretary Rebecca Long-Bailey is live and joins us from Salford. And I go back to that question, Rebecca. The nation will look at you both in utter despair. At the heart of all this, a very simple question. How can we trust you? Fayed's question. This was a chance for Jeremy Corbyn to address his own shortcomings with honesty. He couldn't defend his own personality or his integrity. He couldn't address anti-Semitism or racism within the Labour Party. He just called it a scourge on the society. Why?
I'm afraid I disagree with your analysis. I think Jeremy certainly shone out as the candidate with integrity. Boris Johnson failed to answer the question that was put to him from the audience member about integrity and tried to deflect onto Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy was quite clear about the position of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party and the work that he's done to stamp it out, not just within the Labour Party but also within society. He answered the questions on Brexit clearly and pointed out that he was a consensus builder. He wanted to bring communities together, and after 3 years of parliamentary drama engineered by the Conservative Party trying to feed their own factions, the only option would be to get a credible deal that protected the economy and give the choice to the people to determine whether they're happy with that deal or not.
You heard James Cleverly there. He said he was calling out Labour on its lies about the NHS, and he also said that Jeremy Corbyn had refused 9 times to commit to his own position on Brexit. Why can Jeremy Corbyn not answer his own position on Brexit?
Jeremy Corbyn's position on Brexit is that Jeremy will ensure that we get a deal with the European Union within 3 months, and within 6 months that deal will be put to a public vote to determine whether people are happy. Well, that is his position, and he's been very clear
Rebecca, but
on that. His main priority is...
Why does he believe that voters don't have a right to know how he would campaign? All the other party leaders have told us. Why not him? Why is he so special in this?
Because it's important that if a Prime Minister is trying to secure a good deal with the European Union, that's his main focus, rather than stating how he would campaign on that deal without seeing what the final deal would look like. It's impractical and it makes no sense at all. Jeremy's focus is to get the best possible deal and then to put that back to the people. But on the issue of lies, now I wouldn't cast aspersions on it.
I'm just saying, we know how your Home Secretary... We know what the Shadow Home Secretary thinks, we know what the Brexit Secretary thinks, we know what the Foreign Secretary thinks, we know what the Chancellor thinks. Why do we still not know what our next Prime Minister would do on Brexit if that were Jeremy Corbyn? It just seems an extraordinary thing to leave out of the debate on the central issue of our time.
It's not extraordinary when you're going to be faced with negotiating with the European Union for the best possible deal that you can. And to outline what your position could be at the end of those negotiations would be impractical and implausible. And it's right that he takes this approach to make sure we get the best possible deal. But ultimately, it's not for politicians to decide on this. And that's why our party's position is to let the people decide and give them the final say. But I want to address the point about lies. Now, I wouldn't cast aspersions on anybody's character, but I think tonight Boris Johnson was somewhat economical with the truth right throughout the debate. We talk about the NHS. Jeremy did a fantastic job of outlining
that point
the
on
scandal
the NHS.
that Channel 4 dispatches outlined on how our NHS was indeed up for sale. He also mentioned various figures. He talked about Labour's corporation tax rate potentially being the highest in Europe. It won't be. That's an outright lie. He talked about climate change being one of the most important issues that we have to deal with, whilst his own position is actually that he stated that climate change was a primitive fear without foundation. So the Conservative Party are being economical with the truth right through this. And I think the illustration of the new fact-check Twitter handle outlines that.
Yeah, well, we've had that conversation with the Conservatives. You want to be straight with people. You're the party that's going to tell people about taxation, tell them about spending, tell them about the amount of time that Brexit will take, and you can't, because every time you try and talk about anything else, all the Conservatives have to do is say, or all voters have to do is say, you won't answer the central question. It makes you and your leader look shady. Why would you risk that?
When have we ever not answered a question about spending or investment?
Now,
and this election will be no
Brexit.
different. We'll be publishing... Well, about Brexit, we've been clear. We want to get a deal, firstly, the best deal that we can, that puts our economy first, that protects workers, that protects the environment, and that also ensures that we have a good working relationship with the European Union. And then we will put that to a final public vote where people will determine whether they're happy with it or not, alongside the option of remain. I'm not sure what's ambiguous about that position. It seems pretty clear to me.
Well, I guess he wouldn't have been asked it 9 times if it was that clear to other people in the room. But Rebecca Long-Bailey, thank you very much indeed. The Liberal Democrats, the SNP, Brexit and Green parties weren't part of that debate, but their leaders are currently being interviewed on ITV as part of a second one. They were asked whether they would consider an alliance with either the Conservative or Labour parties. Here's a flavour of what they've said so far.
Are not going to put either Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn into power, because I believe our country deserves better than either of them. And I think anyone watching that debate tonight, will surely agree with that.
I've been very clear. I would never put Boris Johnson or, in fact, any Tory into Downing Street. I've seen the damage that Tory governments do to communities the length and breadth of Scotland and indeed the UK. I would want, if the arithmetic allowed this, to be part of a progressive alternative to the Conservatives.
I've been trying to put together a Leave alliance, to say to the Conservatives and others, this issue is bigger than any political party, but unfortunately it's not something the Conservatives wanted to do. I think if we had, we'd have got some senior Labour figures involved as well, and the alliance would have romped the election, but that didn't happen.
Well, we're joined in the studio by the Liberal Democrats, Chuka Umunna, and from Salford by the SNPs, Humza, Yousaf and Natalie Bennett from the Green Party.
Loud and clear.
Good, you can hear us. It's all a bit ready as we go, because I know the debate is still going on in Salford tonight. But Humza, if I can just start with you. You will have heard Jeremy Corbyn earlier say no second referendum for Scotland, no Indie referendum in the early years. So will you still go into coalition with Labour if that's a plan that he's sticking to?
I think you'll understand when I say this that Jeremy Corbyn's position on Scottish independence seems to change by the minute, let alone the hour, let alone the day or the week. So I'm not sure what he says now is necessarily his position if he gets the keys to number 10. To answer your question directly, and the First Minister has said this time and time again, we will do what we can to stop Boris Johnson and any Tory getting into number 10. We will be part of a progressive alliance, be it with Labour, Liberal Democrats, Plaid Cymru or the
to be
Greens.
fair, your position slightly changes, because we heard from Nicola Sturgeon, don't bother picking up the phone unless you can offer an Indie ref. Now, you've just said you'll stop the Conservatives, so presumably if it was a chance of getting Jeremy Corbyn into power with or without an Indie ref, you'd say yes.
well, we'd be part of a progressive alliance, but it's not just about getting Jeremy Corbyn into number 10. If he wants to be an effective Prime Minister, get his programme of promises that he's made during the election through, then he would need a partner, progressive partners in an alliance like the SNP, like Liberal Democrats, as I say, Plaid Cymru and the Greens, to do that. So if he wants to do that, and Nicola Sturgeon is right, he shouldn't even bother picking up the phone if he is not prepared to grant that Section 30. And I should say at this point, Emily, that of course it should be not up to Jeremy Corbyn nor Boris Johnson the timetable of another referendum. It should be to the Scottish people, and the Scottish Parliament of course has already voted for another Scottish independence referendum.
Well, wait a second. If Labour does win and offers a second referendum on the EU and Remain wins, then nothing has changed. Presumably at that point, the SNP would drop their request for another indie ref.
Not in the slightest, because Brexit is just one example about how Scotland, frankly, has been shafted by governments that they did not vote for. In Scotland, we've had the rape clause, we've had the bedroom tax, we've had universal credit, just to name a few of the things that Scotland did not vote for. So yes, Brexit is certainly one of the symptoms of a broken Westminster system, but I'm telling you, people in Scotland look at that plus a decade of austerity and say that is a system that just isn't working for us.
Because she said it had to be as the result of significant change, because she cited Brexit, meaning that a second indie ref could happen because of significant change. Now, if we end up staying in the EU, there will be no significant change, will there?
Well, one, as I say, there's plenty of other reasons other than Brexit to vote. But the second point is, let's just take your hypothetical that there's a people's vote and that people vote to stay within the European Union. Do you honestly, genuinely think that that will put the issue of Brexit to bed in the rest of the United Kingdom, in England, let alone the rest of the United Kingdom? Somehow, I don't think that would be the case. So those years and years of that Brexit drama ongoing, where Scotland will be the only country that will be shafted, because let's not forget, England voted to leave, you're going to leave. Wales voted to leave, you're going to leave. Northern Ireland voted to remain and gets a differentiated deal. Scotland voted to remain and we have to leave. So I don't think this is going to settle the debate once or for all.
Humza, thanks very much. Chuka, now we just heard Jo Swinson rule out again working with either Jeremy Corbyn or Boris Johnson. Just to clarify for us, for viewers, she would work with Labour or the Conservatives, just not those two leaders, is that right?
No, as they are, neither of those parties is fit for government and neither of their leaders is fit to be Prime Minister. And I have to object. I mean, Emily, this show and actually what we've just seen on ITV illustrates how ludicrous it is to have a debate with Labour and the Tories and then everybody else after.
Because then you can actually... I really want to clarify this. Then
you can actually have us all have this debate together. So if there are claims that the SNP are going to prop up Labour, let them have the debate in the same room.
Well, tell me where you are. That's all I'm asking, because I know that Jo Swinson doesn't want to work with Jeremy Corbyn or Boris Johnson. What does that mean in terms of you working with Labour or the Conservatives? It's really simple.
It's very simple, and she's given us a simple answer to the question, is that neither of these parties is fit for government, and neither of their leaders
Labour's or parties
is fit to be Prime Minister. I've just talked about the leaders, and I've talked about the parties.
So she's not going to work with Labour or the Conservatives?
Well, she can be clearer in what she said, but there's one...
No, just say that again. She's not going to work with Labour or the Conservatives.
Neither of those parties is fit for office, and neither has a leader fit to be Prime Minister.
I understand that's not what I've said.
Yes, but will we work cross-party in a new Parliament, depending on what we're seeing the configuration being? Will we work cross-party? Of course we do, on different discrete issues where we agree.
How do we get to the next government? If there isn't an obvious majority for one party or another, what do the Lib Dems do? I don't understand it.
Well, there's two issues here. One is our absolute priority is to stop Brexit, and that was one of the absurd things about a debate. So just say here,
you cannot work with the Conservatives.
Just let me finish my sentence. There is a real problem where you have a debate between two characters who are not committed to stop Brexit, and a large proportion of our public wants to stop Brexit, and they're left completely out of the room. That is the main issue, and that comes down to parliamentary arithmetic and numbers.
But in terms of the formation of a new government,
this is the whole reason that we are having the general election, and the people will decide what the outcome of that will be and how many MPs they want to deliver for each of the parties. But I just come back to the central point again. This is multi-party politics, and our broadcasters have got to reflect that. You can't keep setting up this thing where you put Labour and the Tories, and we see that ridiculous debate with James and Rebecca, and everyone else is out of the room.
Do you know what?
Justice a democracy
you
is today.
took this to the courts, as we know. The courts found in favour of ITV, and you had a separate debate later. Now, why aren't you telling me about why people should vote for the Lib Dems and what they get, instead of banging on about the debates?
Well, actually, I answered the question that you asked, which was, would we support either Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn?
No, I didn't
to be
ask
Prime
that.
Minister?
I did not ask that.
Would we?
I
answered that question. Then the question was, would you work with other parties? Well, we do that already. We work on issues where we actually agree.
You might be in a position where the Lib Dems, as happened before in 2015, have to become the kingmakers. 2010 rather, have to become the kingmakers. Now, queenmakers. Now, take me through this. If there is a party that can have your help, and that party is the Conservatives, would you go into government with them?
I've answered the question
just say no
already.
then, just say no. Right, would you go into government with Labour in a different guise if it wasn't Jeremy Corbyn? Can you imagine that?
Look, neither of the parties is fit for purpose, and neither of their leaders is fit to be Prime Minister. If, in a new Parliament, who is the government is one thing.
So they don't vote for Lib Dems to see you in power. That's what I'm trying to understand.
Well,
People shouldn't vote for a Lib Dem to see you in power unless you can win a miraculous 326 seats. Is that right?
We are putting forward an offer to the British people. Some would have you believe that the only choice you've really got is between two parties that have let you down, that have had internal civil wars and haven't been focusing on the real issues facing our country, who have failed to deal with Brexit and ensure that we get a resolution to that issue. There is actually a bigger choice at this election.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think if people want the same old, chaotic British politics, if you vote for one of the two main parties that is at the root of this broken system, you won't see any change.
Chuka, thank you. Let me bring in Natalie Bennett of the Greens. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about who is the safest pair of hands as our next leader. I'm trying to get to the bottom of what the Green Party think. Just looking at your foreign policy, in the last manifesto, I think you said your long-term goal was to leave NATO. Is that still your manifesto? Is that still your pledge on foreign policy?
Well, we're in a situation now where, if you look at indeed President Macron of France is saying this is a very tired, failed system. We have a situation with Donald Trump in America, who's a great cause for concern. What we have to do is move towards a much more multilateral world. We want to, of course, remain as part of the EU, as a force for human rights and democracy around the world. We need to look at strengthening the United Nations as a force in the world. So what we have to do is really look at building a different kind of world.
Just let me understand that. So we know that the Greens want to stay in the EU, that's given, but you want to leave NATO. Would we still have armed forces under a Green government? Do you still want our country to defend itself?
We very much believe in having an armed forces, and one of the issues that we've focused on a great deal is the issue of the treatment of our armed forces and the members of our armed forces, people who are very much drawn often from the poorer parts of the community and treated very badly.
Just stay with me on this.
Sorry, let me finish this. We want to keep armed forces to take our role in UN peacekeeping. We want to take armed forces in terms of civil defence. What we don't want to do, and what the Green Party has consistently opposed, is the kind of military adventurism like we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Sure, but
we
there's
need
no
to take
partnering
a new place
with
in
NATO.
the world as a respected force for human rights and democracy. Well, what we need to do is move in a different direction, a direction of multilateralism, a direction that remains in the EU
with who?
that looks at working in terms of for human rights and democracy. Well,
with who though? If we're not with NATO,
the
who do
UN
we
has
work
to be
with?
the key force.
Is it like an EU army? I'm trying to, you say you don't want a special relationship with America and you don't want NATO. So who do we work with?
Well, the EU army, first of all, is a myth. It doesn't exist and it isn't going to exist. So, that's a myth that we can put over with
I'm
Nigel
just
Farage
asking
and lots of other
who your ideal partners are, that's
for
all.
Brexit party mates. Well, we want to work with people around the world under UN auspices who are working for human rights and democracy, who are working to deal. I was at a debate yesterday with the Overseas Development Institute looking at the issue of international aid. And, the Green Party, we want to increase our aid to 1% of gross national income from the 0.7% now. And it's really telling the Tories weren't there to put their figure. Makes us secure, what gives us security is not guns or weapons or certainly nuclear weapons. It's a secure world where people don't have to worry about putting food on the table, keeping a roof over their head.
Natalie Bennett, thank you very much indeed. Chuka Umunna, thanks a lot.